Welcome to Hell. Beneath its fluffy cartoon appearance, oxygen not included is quite possibly the single most inhumanely cruel video game ever made. The primary and singular goal of the game being quite simply to drag out the suffering of the most accursed creature in God's good black galaxy, the duplicant. Created for nearly no other reason than to suffer, these most tragic of troglodytes are endowed with near-nil survival instinct, and even more sparsely blessed with brain cells. The hapless sinners' souls are sent here to this asteroid prison to agonize for eternity, and are quite clearly the reincarnated forms of people like Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, and Kathleen Kennedy. Indeed, the only correct move a good and benevolent person could possibly make upon booting up the game is to simply allow your initial 3 victims to run out of air and thusly cut short their torture. The game even gives you this hint in the title, oxygen not included. The creators, clearly quite terrified at the sight of the abuse simulator they had crafted, tried to inform the player that the only merciful path is the one deprived of air. But should you, however, in your infinite evil and genuine hatred for intelligent life, decide to try and drag out your charge's hardships, then there is a lengthy list of things that need to be done to sweet. For example, the dupes have the bladder capacity of squirrels, though they do possess admirable urinary discipline, and so, if not provided with adequate facilities, will all piss themselves in perfect unison every morning. As a minor aside, in the good old days, this proclivity for predictable pee production could be used to create a functionally infinite source of water. You would place a duplicant in a hole, restricting its movement as much as possible, and then simply wait for the yellow river of life to flow. For extra points, you could also ensure the dupe had the ugly crier trait. This way, by allowing it to wallow in its own refuse whilst tormenting it, depriving it of entertainment and joy, the duplicant's morale will swiftly plummet, resulting in, you guessed it, crying, and yet more water production. Admittedly, the constant screams and soul-wrenching sobs can chip away at the sanity of some, but this is why Allah granted unto us the mute button. Contrarians could possibly argue that simply silencing the suffering of a creature clearly capable of emotions is not, in and of itself, enough to actually remove the damning moral implications of keeping it trapped in a tiny, dark room solely so as to harvest its bodily fluids. But to those lily-livered loons, I simply say that it is a mercy. After all, the dupe in the hole will be allowed the sweet release of death long before the others, still out there in the darkness, clawing away at the asteroid's walls with their itsy-bitsy breaky fingies. Besides, it's all moot now anyways. In these soft days, this method for water production is no longer quite as practical, so I strongly suggest you construct some toilets. Oh, well, buckets in sheds, at least for now. Some sinks where your servants can wash their hands will not go amiss either, as duplicants, being possessed of only barely measurable intelligence, will quite happily shit where they eat, rubbing their freshly dung-draped hands all over their food before inhaling it whole. Actually, a pause for a second right there. Despite having routed my later lavatories directly to a piss and effluence tank for later reclamation and cooling purposes, I never once saw so much as a single solitary brown nugget breach the surface. This very well may be, gentlemen, the justification we have all been searching for. A balm for our inflamed moralities. After all, it is only wrong to torture the duplicants if they are truly alive. But the hallmark of all things living is that they poop. A truly key concept right there, for you see, it should not be called survival of the fittest, but rather survival of the shittest. Hear me out here. Much like Darwin, I aim to leave my mark on history with this theory. A poisonous frog may not be overly likely to kill and eat a lion, but if the pussy dines out on a brightly coloured frog, it will swiftly follow in the froggy's footsteps, right up onto the pearly gates. Which of course makes it crystal clear that a winner in the eat or be eaten competition cannot be crowned before the loser has been strained out through the winner's asshole. Because of this, we can say with absolute certainty that all things that live shit. And so if a thing does not shit, it does not live. E.g., duplicants due to their fecal deficiencies are not alive. Eureka! No matter how terrible their treatment may be from here on out, it is no worse than throwing a rock at some other rocks. Though still, a measure of prudence should be taken in their handling, for you see, your victims have a morale stat. This can be effectively and rapidly reduced by, say, dunking them in cold water, getting them sick, or ensuring they spend as much time as possible submerged in carbon monoxide. Alternatively, you can also achieve all three of these key points simultaneously. 1. Depriving them of body heat by dunking them in a liquid. 2. Getting them sick. And 3. Ensuring they are not allowed to breathe by sending them down into the piss tank to fix a faulty wire. But I get away from myself. Survival was supposed to be the goal, not torture. Yet. The point is, your duplicants are conformists, taking pedantic pride in ensuring that everything is precisely as it should be. In turn, demanding certain rooms to be a precise certain size and contain only certain items before they will deign to recognize it as a room. A latrine is only a latrine if it does not have flush toilets. If it does, then it is a bathroom, you see. And heavens forbid you put something other than chairs or decorative rocks with penises in the dining room. They would reject such barbarism outright. But so long as you abide by their traditionalist ways, they will gain a morale bonus from the rooms. This will not only keep them relatively sane, but will also allow you to hoist more work onto them. Literally, in some cases, as designating a slave a certain way and offering them a fancy hat will increase their carrying capacity by 400 kilograms. Raising, of course, the next logical question: what do you do with all of these bountiful resources dug out from your asteroid gulag? Well, like all good building games, you use them to facilitate the gathering of more shiny rocks. Build for building's sake. Though in the name of complete candor, oxygen not included has a particularly good motivation for continuing to build stuff, namely the avoidance of death. And oh boy, there are a lot of ways to die on an asteroid. At one point, for example, to illustrate a more unnatural hazard, I had designated a pair of servants to dissipate some heat in an area via the ingenious application of a fan and a block of ice. This worked out about as well as you would expect, frankly, like trying to put out an oil rig fire by tossing babies at it. But I kept the duplicants on the job lest the lesser classes think I had made some sort of mistake. Then some time passed, and eventually I started routing lethal radiation through the area. Now, I know what you're thinking. Arch, you sadistic sop, that hardly sounds like an accident, but I reassure you, I had no idea enough radiation to burn skin in seconds could actually hurt them. It wasn't until I saw severely wounded duplicants wandering through the base that I suspected something was not quite right. I had recently ordered them to survey an actively erupting volcano, so I figured it was just a handful of third-degree burns caused by liquid copper. That'll heal on its own soon enough, no need to worry. But if anything, the number of damaged property only increased. Eventually getting suspicious about the source of the mutilation, I discovered that my radiation science building was indeed sending all of its radiation right past the pair of workstations. Oh well. Life is cheap in Uni. Beyond cheap, really. In fact, it is free, as new servants will come popping out of your mystical, magical gateway of pain and suffering every few cycles. And again, in my defense, the game never actually told me that radiation was dangerous. But, anywho, we are putting the old proverbial horse an asteroid's length before the cart here, as radiation research is not quite your first port of call. We're still on the toiletry stuff, after all. Once the issue of public and involuntary urination has been sorted, your spoiled little hirelings will be wanting something to eat. Obviously, I always advise considerable caution when it comes to bending to the demands of the filthy proletariat working class, but food does have its benefits. Technically, you could just replace the old duplicants with new duplicants, as they inevitably waste away due to starvation. This peculiar survival strategy is often referred to as socialism. And whilst I often dabble in its ways with ever-shortening meal-ice lines in the early days of a colony, I tend to find considerable fault with the digging speed of 1 to 2 malnourished asteroidians. So, in the name of increased productivity, I usually go back to a more capitalistic supply and demand style operation, growing food and feeding it to the prisoners on a regular basis. It does wonders for productivity, let me tell you, and if you do it right, the desperate masses will praise your generosity for even the most mouldy piece of bread. But the conquest of meal lice is not quite as simple as just growing food, or, well, no, it is, but if you want to be fancy about it, there are many different ways to grow food. Many different ways to cook the hamburger and create an overweight, happy populace where obesity is a more grand problem than starvation. The basic meal is the aforementioned meal lice, a gribbly-grobbly lice-like life form that totally certainly probably is not just real lice. No. Just suspiciously shaped plants, you see. And why, yes, they do wriggle uncomfortably in the mouth. The texture is an abomination to the taste buds, and the flavor is quite reminiscent of a big, bald raccoon poop, kept warm and juicy by a quick grill and some tinfoil wrap. It is, however, food. And to the starving supplicant, even the foulest affair is a delight. At least, so I keep telling them, but again, as I mentioned previously, they are a remarkably ungrateful lot, and would not cease their incessant complaining. So, I started pickling the lice in vinegar. It promoted the vileness of the food from a mere misdemeanor to an outright war crime. But it stopped the complaining darn quick, it did. Fear of what I might potentially do to their food next was a far more compelling force than the urge to whinge any further. Brewing rebellion reasonably resolved, the next question then becomes, beyond pure sadism, why meal lice? Well, it's easy and cheap to create, that's why. A dash of dirt is all it takes, and dirt is pretty easy to come by on a massive dirt asteroid. Later, however, when the primary reason for the cessation of labor services is no longer death via the deprivation of nutrients, the aftertaste does become a hurdle, as you would like to increase your little duplicant's morale stats. Better food leads to better workers. And so another good early-ish alternative is dust caps. These fanciful fungi require a pure carbon dioxide atmosphere, but CO2 is a very cooperative gas and quite easy to fix in place. In return, the dust cap produces mushrooms. Imagine that, I know. And if you pop them on the barbie for a bit, they transform into fried mushrooms. These are both more nutritious and tastier than the lice. Absolutely brilliant, I know, but even that is not the end. If you want to be extra special, you can combine multiple ingredients to chef up combo breaker breakfasts. Get some waterweed, a capricious shrubbery to be certain that must be submerged in water but only partially, lest it drown, and then a gas on top, plus regular irrigation with salt water. Getting more complicated now, and after 12 days you will hold in your hand the most loathsome of things: lettuce. You can reduce the offense by then taking the shrooms and wrapping it in the lettuce, forming a mushroom wrap. A calorie bomb almost 5 times as good as meal lice, and, allegedly, tasty to boot. I'm starting to wonder as to on what ground the duplicants object to the meal lice if lettuce is tasty. This, then, is a basic production evolution line in Uni. The connoisseurs amongst you may be flaring your nostrils at this. What? A mere 3-step enrichment process? I shall go back to my modded Factorio, where it takes 17 factories and a spider robot just to produce a rubber ducky. But wait, the real charm of the game lies in the preparation of the environment. The dusk mushrooms grow only in a carbon monoxide atmosphere, which your pawns cannot breathe. And you are required to service the dust caps with regular supplies of slime, another naturally occurring resource, though one that can quickly become quite scarce indeed, requiring another way of acquiring it, but we'll get to that in a little bit. First and foremost, then, you must find a way to trap a sufficient quantity of CO2 in an area that is intended for dust cap production. Then, since you need your duplicant to work with it, you need to create gas masks for them, requiring the extraction of other raw material and fabrication bench. And this, too, is a fairly basic example. Let's add on the waterweed on top of it. As mentioned, it must be submerged in just enough water, requiring active fluid control of an area. It also requires a supply of salt water to be discovered and piped in, plus atmosphere control. If, for example, you choose to have the atmosphere be oxygen, well, your dupes will breathe that in, requiring a constant supply of the gas. If you instead decide to make it a carbon monoxide atmosphere, you won't have to worry about your duplicants devouring all of it, but you'll then require airlock systems to make sure it doesn't leak out, and you'll require yet further gas masks for your lovely little duplicants. And since these things use resources, salt water, slime, dirt, etc., you need to build further systems to support all of it. Salt water can be extracted from saltwater geysers. Slime can be created via ranching, trapping little puffles in a polluted oxygen atmosphere, which you must then maintain and replenish. Husbandry is its whole own system, with the best of all features, of course, breeding, coupled with selective mutations. Take the hatch as an example. A diminutive little creature that eats your resources and seems at first glance to be good for nothing more than being mercilessly hunted down and murdered en masse. And then, of course, so as to not waste any resources, quickly devoured to fuel your early game hunger needs. But what's this? The darned thing strained a piece of dirt through his digestive tract and somehow secreted coal? What dark magic exactly occurs in the pink thing's stomach is anyone's guess, but now we have a way of turning plentiful dirt into rare and valuable coal. The hatcher's poop, you see, can be used to run coal generators, which produce electricity, that in turn run the water pumps that send the water to the oxidizers, that turns water into oxygen and hydrogen. A little bit of pipeline magic later, and the hydrogen has been separated from the oxygen. The hydrogen being dispatched to a power generator, where pink is used to produce power. That is the only reasonable assumption, as there is no way hydrogen functions like this. No, just simply no. Whilst the oxygen, on the other hand, has been piped a quick trip outside the asteroid to chill it down before venting it into the base, providing both breathable air and cooling. We'll get back to the hot in a second, but even better than a hatch is the stone hatch. Feed the little rascals sedimentary rock, and a rocky egg may pop fully formed from their rectum. When you subsequently shove metal ore down the new and rugged-looking hatch mouth hole, it will eventually produce a shiny egg. And this is the most precious thing to ever come forth from nearly any animal's ass. Smooth hatches. Another god and reality-defying abomination that eats raw minerals and defecates fully refined metal ingots. This alloy is considerably shinier than raw ore and so naturally superior in each and every way. A bit slimy due to the production method, sure, but refined metal can be used, and indeed must be used, to build advanced nonsense. You can also use a refinery building, but it produces a great deal of heat, both in its immediate area, and heats up the water used to cool the machinery as well, and heat is the death of colonies. One might imagine that after spending a few hundred cycles in hell, toasty temperatures ought to be the least of the duplicant's concerns, but when the thermometer starts pushing heatstroke levels, you will be quite impressed at the rate at which cosplaying as the sun can depopulate your subterranean home. Even faster, in fact, than the most prolific cause of death amongst residents: idiocy, as demonstrated by the soon-to-be deceased example here, sleeping face down in a puddle of crude oil. Oh yes, sweltering temperatures will cleanse your ranks even faster than Darwinism, and heat is an insidious threat. Everything you do creates heat. Growing crops, running machinery, storing energy, farting, eating, everything. And since in Uni space is a perfect vacuum, there is nowhere for all of that warmth to go. It'll stay right there in your hairy, sweaty little armpits. And by the time it's built up to be a problem, you're already boned well and thoroughly through. In fact, you've been screwed for weeks. You have to deal with heat and the build-up of it from the very start of the game, planning how to circumvent it, disperse it, and if you don't, a future as a boiled egg is all that awaits you. And I could not possibly even dream of depriving you of the pleasure of grilling your first batch of inmates. So I think we'll wrap it up right there. Oxygen not included. A really quite terrific little title, particularly for the latent sadist, of course. A lovely mix of complex game mechanics, the management of gases, fluids, and heat, whilst also making the actual doing of these things, the moving of gases, the moving of liquids, and eventually the dispersion of heat, fairly self-explanatory and easy to do. That is, if you just want to do it, of course. The game is tismy enough to have spawned entire creator communities focused around the idea of creating ever more efficient, ever more complex, and ever more perfect ways of surviving your asteroid prison. So if you are interested, do give it a look. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.